It is not getting any easier to fix today's cars, is it? It seems as soon as we become comfortable with one technology, there are 4 or 5 more introduced, and it's moving at a lightning pace. So we need information, good information, and a lot broader scope of information than what we're used to in the past. We need a lot more than technical specifications, fluid levels, and torque specs. We need to know exactly how these systems operate, what the components involved are, and how they do their function, how they interrelate to one another. Where do we get that kind of information? That's a question we're going to take on in this edition of In the Workshop. To help us unravel the information maze, I'm going to talk to my friend Ben Johnson over at Mitchell 1. Looks like he's got a project of his own he's working on. Hey Ben, let me ask you a quick question. Do you guys over at Mitchell 1 feel the way the rest of us do, that it's getting tougher to work on today's cars? And if so, what are the challenges that you're seeing?
What a great timed question, Pete. Good to see you, first of all. Sorry you kind of caught me working on my own car. So, well, the easy answer is that of course it's more complex today, right? The cars don't seem to break as often, but when they do break, a lot more systems, CAN buses, multiple sensors reading for different things. It's pretty complex. But it's interesting, Pete. I was just recently working on a presentation we gave to our national sales guys, and I was thinking about the exact same problem. And while we think about today's cars as being complex, and you think that Mitchell's been in this business for nearly 100 years. And so just for fun, I actually dug out some old books out of the library. This book is one of the books from one of the companies that made up Mitchell. And it goes back actually, I'm told, to 1912 for certain models. And from 1912 to like 1929, and this is just electrical systems. Look at the size of this thing. It's over 1,500 pages. And Pete, you look at this, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, but in the day that we're talking about, those technicians had evolved from like working on horse-drawn carriages. And so while we think of those cars as being simple, in their minds, they weren't simple at all. We had distributors with points that had to be adjusted and timing that had to be set and engine mechanical components that would go bad. So, I think that now, much like then, Mitchell was in the business of providing the information they needed to service those cars. And I think now, just like then, as long as we can keep doing that, they can keep successfully fixing these things. So Pete, as I was saying, here's a picture out of that book that I just showed you. And while those cars didn't have CAN buses and adaptive cruise control or ABS brakes or things like that, they had a lot of systems which were new to the industry at that time, like electrical systems and ignition and charging systems and ultimately starters. And when you look in these books and you see the detail that was given to the description of how these things operated, the wiring diagrams that supported them, this was stuff that technicians of the day were hungry for. And back to cars like mine and more complex cars than that, today with multiplex systems and things like that, people are still hungry for the information. If they can get the information on how to fix these cars, they can solve the problems.
Wow, no kidding. 1,500 pages on just electrical systems back in 1925? That surely puts some things in perspective, doesn't it? I'm wondering, if you guys had to print out everything that's contained in ProDemand now, how many pages would that take?
Oh wow, that's a really hard question to answer. The reason it's hard is today we actually do something called micro-publishing, because we get our information from a variety of sources, from the OE content that we get, from the aftermarket content that we get, and a lot of different sources. So, and then on demand, as a technician types in something they want information about, we pull from all those sources and sort of micro-publish a page for them. But I do know that I was looking at some recent numbers, and just for the OEM content, if you were to take and print everything that we've got, you're somewhere around over 23 million pages of information. And I think we've got like over 19 million or around 18, 19 million graphic images, the supporting graphics and things about component locations and all that. And when you think about that and you say we've got nearly 19 million real fixes in our SureTrack database, it's a lot of information.
Wow, that's just incredible. But that kind of presents a different challenge for us nowadays, doesn't it? I mean, how does the technician find exactly what he or she needs?
You know, it sure is. That's a really good point. You know, it's something we've been working on for a long time. You know, when ProDemand was launched, one of our goals was to kind of reduce this time to search, because what you realize is that technicians do have more choices than ever before about where to find information, from sources like Mitchell to just going out on the internet and looking for things. And, you know, one of the things that has come with the complexity of the automobile is we do preach that before you really get under the hood, you should do some research up front so that you don't get buried in the weeds. But with all the options of research available, it's pretty easy to get in, spend too much time doing that you're never going to recoup in the final sale of the service.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I've never had any real problems finding the information I need in ProDemand, and that just speaks volumes for the abilities of your team to get all that data organized. But that still had to be quite a bit of work. I mean, what were some of the challenges and difficulties that your team faced, and how did you address those?
Sure, you know, and it's a work in process, Pete, honestly. When we first designed ProDemand, if you remember, we were the first to actually allow a technician to search on a component and then be one click away through our tabbed interface of finding the procedures about that component, the wiring diagrams associated with it, the component locations and things like that. And that really made a big difference in the technicians' lives. And as we started adding SureTrack content, we started recognizing some challenges. And I'll tell you what, rather than me just talking about it here, let me show you some examples of what I'm talking about. So Pete, what you're seeing now is a slide of ProDemand, and I've kind of highlighted, as I was talking about, we were the first to actually introduce information that allowed the user to navigate very quickly to the type of information about the component that they had searched. And then we started adding a lot of content into the SureTrack product. So, you know, between 2012 and 2015, we put nearly 19 million real fixes in there. And while we were doing that, we kind of identified that we had 3 problems that we wanted to, or ways we could enhance the product to make it better for our users. So the first thing we wanted to solve was, while we were very good at identifying the different types of information you could get at when you typed in a component, a lot of problems start with a trouble code, right? Diagnostic trouble code. And a diagnostic trouble code is not necessarily associated with a specific component. It's talking about that the car's onboard computer sensed a problem that points us into an area of the vehicle that we want to be associated with or be looking at more closely. So the bottom line is, if you typed a trouble code into ProDemand, because we didn't have a component associated with it, things like diagrams and component locations and things were not available until you'd gone down the path of defining the component, re-entering that component, and then getting to that information. So that's one of the things we wanted to solve. Another thing was our search technology. While we were great at finding information about a component, the way that OE information is presented is sometimes it's not very friendly for terms. So if you typed in seal, you'd get all the information about every seal on the vehicle we knew about. But if you typed in rear axle seal, which to a user is a pretty descriptive search, you'd get anything coming back to you that had the word rear, axle, or seal in it. So while yes, in theory, they could find what they were looking for, it wasn't the experience we wanted them to have. And the third thing we wanted to address was SureTrack itself. Our SureTrack content is second to none. We've absolutely got more information in there than anybody else in the industry. And with that comes some challenges, right? Because we have not only the information about the odd problems that people run into that actually solve the root causes of these problems that they can solve an issue with, but we also have like just how often the compressors fail in Jettas, and how often idler arms go bad on Luminas, and all those things that didn't require like a call to a hotline, but they're interesting for people to understand if they're kind of diagnosing and think, well, I'm pretty sure this is it. Is this a normal failure range for this particular item? Well, the bottom line is, though, is that with all those standard, easier to find things up front, because they're more popular, they would kind of push some of the harder to find but sometimes very valuable information down the bottom of our list. So we wanted to address that. So Pete, as you can see here, you know, I talked about the first problem we wanted to address. One of the things we did was based on our SureTrack content and mapping of the code to the most likely component that it's associated with. You see how now I've entered in a P0401, and we know that the most likely component is the EGR valve. So as I start drilling into that now, I will get all those tabs displayed about the wiring diagram about that system, the component locations about that valve, and things like that. Huge benefit. Customers really like that. The second thing that I talked about was our ability to search out terms. So we actually did a big exercise last year where we looked at all the ways people were typing information into ProDemand and assembling words into actual phrases and terms. And so without going into all the science behind it, just look at this slide and you can see that now when I typed in rear axle seal, instead of that whole page of returns, I get only the information about that rear axle and the rear axle seal that's associated with. So we're pretty excited about that. And then finally, our SureTrack content, remember, I talked about how we were kind of showing all the obvious things and then the less obvious were kind of getting pushed off the page. We've reorganized things now so that when you type in a term, we show you the components that are associated with that failure. So the symptom or the DTC, the most likely components to the least likely components. And then so you can quickly scan those and say, oh yeah, well, maybe it's a no start. Well, the starter I checked, the battery I checked. Important to make sure you kind of check those off your mental checklist. But then when you find something interesting, you click into it, and then we show you all the possible combinations of why that situation occurred, what codes were associated with it, maybe what symptoms were with it, so that you can really drill in fast to get to the root cause of whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Have you got an example of one you can show us?
Yeah, well actually, Pete, this car is a perfect example right now. So this is my own car. It's a Volkswagen Jetta diesel, so other than the fact that it's embroiled in an emissions scandal, I'm driving it to work one day and I noticed the air conditioning's not working well, and it's kind of gotten progressively worse. And so what happens is, I make a long story out of this, but I'm driving the car about the first 5 or 10, maybe 15 minutes, it's blowing warm, and then when it starts working, it kicks in and starts blowing very, very nicely, cold air. Well, so I'm thinking to myself that it's probably, a compressor clutch. It's not kicking in. But using ProDemand, I did some research and figured out this car doesn't even have a compressor clutch as we know it. The compressor is always spinning, and what controls the compressor output is a command by the computer, which tells the compressor how much output, and it's got some valving in there that works. Well, after some diagnosis, I determined the compressor's bad itself. It's getting the right signals, it's just not, the valving's not working right. So I go to price this thing, pretty expensive on this car. So I start second guessing myself. The car's got a little less than 90,000 miles on it. I'm not sure it's really ready for a compressor to be failing, and I didn't want to spend that kind of money without being sure. So I go look into SureTrack, and sure enough, it shows me that around 50,000 miles, these compressors start failing, so I'm actually in my sweet spot.
That's very impressive. It's easy to grab for that silver bullet, trying to find that quick solution to a problem so that you can get that car out of the bay. It's pretty cool that there's a system in place that allows technicians to scan through that data and help them avoid that mistake early on in the process. Appreciate you taking the time to show all that to us. But I got to ask, all the great things that you guys have been working on, what's next in the evolution of ProDemand?
Well, Pete, it's been an interesting journey. When we launched ProDemand and the new technologies behind it, we knew that we were just scratching the surface of the capabilities we could exploit out of this thing. And so we set our goals as far out on the horizon really as we could see. But just like taking a journey, when you get near the end of that horizon and you've achieved those goals, you start seeing what else is possible. Our customers have been fantastic supporters of this product, and they've given us a lot of really nice feedback about how we could make their lives better, and they kind of see what we can do with it as well. So, I've got a couple of examples of things we worked on last year that really made our customers' lives better. Again, let me show you a couple of examples and we'll go through those. So Pete, this screen shows us one of the areas where our customers really helped us. It turns out that over 30% of the time people go into ProDemand, they're really looking for something very quick and very, what should be simple, right? They're looking for a specification, they're looking for a quick wiring chart, they're looking for maybe a reset procedure. And while that stuff was all available, on our one search, they really wanted just a menu of those sorts of things that they could quickly get at. So that resulted in this quick reference link that you see here. So now that we've identified the vehicle, not only do we get the top 10 things, the reasons why a car might show up in a shop, the components that failed, the DTCs that are entered, the symptoms, etc. But they can just quickly, across the top there, say, if I just want a common spec, I just click that and it's right there in front of me. If I want to know what the tire fitment is, I click that and it's right in front of me. If I want a wiring diagram or a technical bulletin, they're right there. So that's one example of how our customers have really helped us shape the product, and the response has been incredible. Last year as well, we spent a lot of time working on refining our printing capabilities and things like that. Refine our views on our tablet capabilities, and so that our customers really don't care whether they want to look up the information on a PC, like I'm looking at here, on a tablet device, or on their diagnostic tool. Our responsibility is to make that information available to them as quickly as possible. So that's kind of an area where they've helped us a lot.
Well, Ben, I really appreciate you taking the time to share all this information with me. We could probably keep this conversation going for quite some time. I really appreciate the fact that Mitchell 1 has taken these efforts to continually evolve their product, listening to their customers' feedback, and I hope you'll keep us in mind and let us know when something new with ProDemand is out there. Keep us posted on its progress.
Absolutely, Pete. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. And yeah, as much as I'd rather keep this conversation going, I probably need to start working on this compressor. So we'll talk to you later.